This is a homily for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 13, verses 22 to 30. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. We're again reminded at the beginning of today's Gospel that Jesus and his disciples are making their way to Jerusalem. This is the first reference to Jerusalem since the beginning of the journey was announced. Luke's account of this journey is the longest section of the Gospel, beginning in chapter 9 at verse 51 and taking us up to chapter 19, verse 27. We're now reading from chapter 13. And today's Gospel brings us almost to the halfway point of the 19 weeks that the Sunday lectionary devotes to this journey to Jerusalem. Let me again stress that this pilgrimage is not just about a journey from Galilee in the north to Jerusalem in the south. It is also an inner journey. Jesus is taking the opportunity to teach his disciples about life in God's kingdom. And there is an urgency about Jesus' teaching. In last Sunday's Gospel, Jesus told the disciples, "I have come to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already lit." As I pointed out last week, we are confronted with a perennial temptation. Let's domesticate this fire. Let's tame it. Let's reduce the call to discipleship to something that is manageable, non-threatening, something that doesn't make excessive demands upon us. American Jesuit Father James Martin writes about a statue of the founder of the Jesuits, St. Ignatius Loyola, that is located in the Jesuit headquarters in Rome. This large bronze statue is displayed prominently in a hall. As you can see, St. Ignatius has his right arm raised upwards, and he is clasping a book with his left hand. On the statue's marble pedestal is one of his most famous sayings, words he is supposed to have said to the great Jesuit missionary St. Francis Xavier before he left on his far-flung travels to Africa, India, and Japan. It reads, "Ite inflammate omnia." Those Latin words mean, "Go, set the world aflame." They evoke the words of Jesus in last Sunday's Gospel. Having read what Father Martin had to say about this statue in the Jesuit headquarters, I Googled it. I was rather taken aback with the photograph that Google supplied. On both sides of the statue and its pedestal, with the words, "Go set the world aflame," were a number of fire extinguishers. Someone explained that these extinguishers had been placed there to be serviced, but the juxtaposition was amusing. It was as though someone was saying, "We don't want anything set aflame here." This calls to mind what Dietrich Bonhoeffer referred to as cheap grace. We want all the consolations of the faith without commitment or conversion. St. John Henry Newman made an interesting distinction in an essay in aid of a grammar of assent. He distinguished between notional assent and real assent. We give notional assent when we agree with something, but it has absolutely no impact whatsoever on our life. New Testament scholar Craig Keener wrote this: "When I was an atheist, one of my central objections to believing anything about Jesus was that 80% of people in my country claimed to be his followers, yet most of them apparently lived as if it made no difference for their lives. In other words, people give notional assent to the beliefs of Christianity, but it has little or no impact upon the way they live their lives. By way of contrast, we have what Newman calls real assent. Something becomes real to me, it has a profound and transformative influence in defining who I am and what I do. Craig Keener again. I reasoned that if I believed that there was truly a being to whom I owed my existence and who alone determined my eternal destiny, I would serve that being unreservedly. That is real assent, or what Bonhoeffer would call costly grace. Today's Gospel again takes up the theme of real assent or costly grace. Jesus is asked a question. Note that the question he is asked was not, "Will I be saved?" or "How will I be saved?" Instead, he is asked, "Sir, will there be only a few saved?" The background to this question was the ongoing debate within Judaism at that time about who would be saved. One point of view is expressed in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is not part of the Jewish scriptures. It is rather a collection of Jewish oral law, as opposed to the written law, the Torah. It contains rulings about matters of practice, custom, ritual, and law, and was compiled or edited into its present form around about 200 AD, although it contains material that is much older. In the tractate on the Sanhedrin, we read, "All Israelites will have a share in the world to come." But not all Jews at the time of Jesus agreed with that. Some taught that only a remnant would be saved. In the fourth book of Ezra, not part of the Bible, but a Jewish work written towards the end of the 1st century AD, we read, "This age the Most High has made for many, but the age to come for few." So the questioner in today's Gospel is asking Jesus for a response. Jesus doesn't answer the question directly. He refuses to speculate on a matter that is best left to the wisdom and mercy of God. In so many words, Jesus seems to be saying, all you need to concern yourself about is your own salvation. He does this by using the image of a door. In fact, the image of two doors. Firstly, that of the narrow door, and then that of the locked door. One door is difficult to enter, the other is impossible because it has been locked. This is a practical warning that people should strive or struggle to enter by the narrow door. Jesus is talking here about costly grace. He demands real assent. Strive to enter by the narrow door, because I tell you, many will try to enter and will not succeed. The locked door is a reminder that it won't stay open forever. Enter now, while it's open, while there's still time. The Greek word translated here as strive is agonizomai. The noun is egon, which could be translated as contest. This is where our English word agony comes from. The Greek verb agonizomai conjures up images of intense exertion in pursuit of victory, whether on a literal battlefield, an athletic arena, or the spiritual plane. Every New Testament occurrence of this verb casts the believer in an arena where determined, costly effort is required to reach a God-appointed goal. In the 1st century Mediterranean world, the noun agon described athletic contests held in stadia across the empire. Competitors submitted to strict training. So entry into the kingdom is not a walk in the park. Some people obviously think that what Jesus has said is unfair. We once ate and drank in your company. Surely that must count for something. You taught in our streets. This is notional assent. We saw you around, we heard you preach, but what did we do about it? Well, not much at all, really. In other words, there is no room for fence-sitters in the kingdom of God. There are no privileged entry permits to the eternal life which Jesus offers. You are either a player or a spectator. You're an actor in the drama of salvation, or you're a member of the audience. Kurt Hahn, founder of Outward Bound, was an educational reformer whose ideas remain as relevant as ever. He founded numerous schools and educational programs during his life. Hahn identified 6 declines facing the youth of his time that he felt needed to be addressed. Needless to say, these declines are not confined to youth. The second of the 6 declines that he identified was the decline of initiative and enterprise due to the widespread disease of spectatoritis. Spectatoritis refers to a decline in initiative and enterprise, simply sitting back passively as a spectator and watching life pass you by. The Outward Bound movement is designed to push students to achieve more than they think they can, leaving them unwilling to settle for less for the rest of their lives. Students who once might have been content on the sidelines find themselves thrown into the mix, cooking food for the team, giving the team directions, and setting up their shelter for the night. Dante's Divine Comedy is the story of a journey to paradise. But before Dante reaches paradise, he must first journey down to the depths of hell, the Inferno, and then begin the slow ascent through purgatory, purgatorio, before reaching Paradiso, or paradise. Dante is accompanied by the poet Virgil as his guide, and no sooner do they pass through the gates of hell than they hear sighs, cries, and shrieks of lamentation. Here they behold souls who are being stung and stung again by hornets and wasps. Because we are in hell, we can assume that they are sinners. But what have they done? What sin have they committed? Virgil explains that this wretched state of being is the fate of those sad souls who lived a life but lived it with no blame and with no praise. In other words, here we have the fence-sitters, those who refuse to choose. They did nothing really evil, but neither did they do any good. Here, by the way, we have an example of what is known as contrapasso, the punishment of a sin by a process that either resembles or is a contrast with the sin itself. In this case, the punishment is in stark contrast to the sin. Because these souls were not passionate about anything during life, they are tormented endlessly by hornets and wasps, and they are also condemned for all eternity to rush after a banner. In life they had no banner, no leader to follow, no cause to which they were committed. Now They run round and round after a banner, endlessly for all eternity. These tormented souls call to mind the judgment passed on the church in Laodicea in the book of Revelation. The first part of the book of Revelation contains a judgment on 7 churches in what was then known as Asia Minor, now Western Turkey. The judgment the Lord passes on the church in Laodicea is this: "Write to the church in Laodicea, I know about your activities, how you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were one or the other, but since you are neither hot nor cold, but only lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth." Let me digress for a minute to offer some interesting background information to this text from Revelation. On this map you can see Laodicea. Hierapolis is to its north, and Colossae is to the southeast. Note that the river Lycus flows by just to the north of Laodicea. New Testament scholar Tom Wright tells us that the one thing that Laodicea did not have was good water. The river Lycus at that point is not strong, and sometimes it dries up altogether in the summer. There are, however, 2 other sources of water, one to the north and the other to the southeast. To the north, standing high on a dramatic cliff, is the city of Hierapolis. It boasts to this day a set of hot springs to which tourists come from all over the world. The hot, chemically charged water comes bubbling out of the ground and spills over the cliff, leaving a white mineral deposit visible from miles around. So here again you can see Hierapolis on the map just to the north of Laodicea. In the 1st century they built aqueducts to bring this water across to Laodicea in the centre of the valley, 4 or 5 miles away. They can still be seen today, with their insides covered in hardened mineral deposit. By the time the water arrived in Laodicea, it was no longer hot. It was merely lukewarm. What was worse, the concentrated chemicals made it unsuitable to drink. To the southeast of Laodicea was the town of Colossae. Colossae had a splendid supply of water flowing down from the high, snow-capped Mount Cadmus, fast-flowing, chilly streams of almost alpine quality. But by the time the water reached Laodicea, 11 miles away, the normal Turkish heat meant that it too had become lukewarm. Again, looking at the map, you can see Colossae to the southeast. So the water from the hot springs of Hierapolis had cooled down, and the fresh, cold spring water from Colossae had heated up by the time it reached Laodicea. Like the water from the hot springs of Hierapolis or the fresh, cold spring water from Colossae, the people of Laodicea had become lukewarm in their commitment. They were neither one thing nor the other. They were fence-sitters. Let's consider the fence-sitter from another perspective. There were 2 monks walking beside a river, an older monk and a young novice. The novice had come from the countryside and had never seen such a wide river before. He was absolutely fascinated. He kept on pestering the older monk with endless questions about the river. Where does the river come from? Where is it going? How fast is it flowing? How deep is it? Is the water hot or cold? Can you drink the water? The questions went on and on. Totally exasperated, the older monk pushed the novice into the river. There you are! Now you know. We can spend a lot of time looking at the river, asking questions about the river, but there comes a moment when we have to jump in. It is a moment of commitment, of awakening, a moment of enlightenment, a moment of conversion. Our journey of faith is like that. It's not enough to say, "Lord, we once ate and drank in your company. You taught in our streets." In other words, "Lord, I went to a Catholic school. I attended Mass fairly regularly. I put money on the collection plate. I've read the Gospels." That is cheap grace, unless it reflects a true commitment, a genuine conversion. We can be very devout as long as it doesn't cause any inconvenience to our way of life. We want the warmth of the womb, not the pain and travail of a new birth. Consider the woman who listened attentively to all of her parish priest's homilies. She regarded him as the fountain of all wisdom, until one day he preached on the destructive effects of gambling. She immediately arose from her pew and stormed out of the church. A friend asked her what had upset her. She explained, "Well, Father is marvellous when he's preaching, but now he's started meddling." That reminds me of what I call the vaccination approach to religion. Our English word vaccination and vaccine comes from the Latin word for cow, vacca. Here's how that came about. Smallpox has killed billions of people throughout human history. An estimated 300 to 500 million people were killed in the 20th century alone. That is, between 1900 and 2000 AD. 30% of infected people died within the second week of infection. The pioneer of the smallpox vaccine was Edward Jenner. Jenner died in 1823. Jenner began his medical career at the age of 13, as what today we would call an apprentice. He recalled a young dairymaid telling the doctor to whom he was apprenticed that she would never get smallpox because she'd had cowpox. Cowpox is a skin disease that resembles smallpox and infects cows, hence the name cowpox. As a fully fledged doctor, Jenner remembered what the young dairymaid had said, that people who got cowpox didn't develop the deadly smallpox. So he decided to put it to the test. In May 1796, Jenner came across Sarah Nelms, the young dairymaid who had fresh cowpox lesions on her hands and arm. So using the matter from her pustules, he inoculated an 8-year-old boy by the name of James Phipps. After a few days of fever and discomfort, poor James seemed to recover. 2 months later, Jenner inoculated James again, this time with matter from a fresh smallpox lesion. No disease developed. That's how Jenner developed the smallpox vaccine. So, the vaccination approach to religion works along similar lines. It's as though at baptism we give the child a mild dose of religion, the equivalent of cowpox, thereby rendering them immune to any serious attacks of religion for the rest of their lives. A number of years ago, I was the parish priest of the parish of St. Francis of Assisi within the Archdiocese of Sydney. Pigeons were a constant problem. Not just one or two pigeons, but a large flock of pigeons had made the church and school buildings their home. They perched on every ledge and on the rooftop. Pigeon droppings everywhere. It looked unsightly, and pigeon nests were a potential fire hazard. How to get rid of pigeons? We discussed the matter at our local deanery meeting. One priest suggested getting rid of them using an air rifle. I didn't like the sound of that, and I'm certain it would have been illegal. But more importantly, the name of my parish was St. Francis of Assisi. Our patron saint would certainly not have approved. We did place deterrents along all the ledges, just like the ones you can see here, but they didn't work. The pigeons managed to make themselves at home amidst these unsightly deterrents. One priest suggested putting out poison bait, but again, I don't think St. Francis would have approved. Nor did I want dead pigeons lying around the school playground. One of the priests told us that he'd read a newspaper article about the City of London and how it was dealing with the pigeon problem. Pigeons had been successfully scared off by having a resident hawk patrolling buildings. It might have worked in my parish, but looking after a hawk was beyond my capabilities. Another priest told us of a successful strategy he had employed. A decoy couple of pigeons is placed in a cage on the roof of the church. They attract other pigeons who enter the cage but can't get out. When the cage is full, they are taken several miles away and released. That seemed to work for a while, but the pigeons eventually returned in even greater numbers. So, what to do? Which strategy is most effective? After a silence, one priest at the meeting said, "I have the perfect solution. It works every time. I baptize my pigeons and I never see them again." The Church of Scotland minister, George MacLeod, had fought courageously in the First World War and was awarded the Military Cross for valour. In later years he became a pacifist, at a time when pacifism was not a popular cause. Nevertheless, he espoused this cause with great passion at every convention of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. But he soon realised he was not being taken seriously. In fact, his interventions were regarded with a degree of amusement. MacLeod was a perceptive man and likened his situation to a missionary who was sent to preach the gospel among a primitive tribe in Africa. In due course, the missionary learnt their language and was accepted among them. Before long, he was invited by the tribal elders to participate in their annual festival, a festival which the missionary found abhorrent and obscene. And so, in powerful words, he fiercely denounced this evil ritual as a filthy abomination. The natives didn't appreciate his intervention and violently set upon him, beating him almost to death. The missionary managed to limp back to the village and continued with his missionary work as if nothing had happened. On the same occasion, the following year, he was again invited to the festival, and again he denounced the obscene rituals, and again he was severely beaten. For 9 consecutive years, he repeated his denunciation at festival time, with the inevitable outcome on each occasion. Eventually he died a natural death. On the year following the missionary's death, as the time for the annual festival drew near, the chief of the tribe sent an urgent request to the church headquarters to send another missionary. We must have another missionary. His denunciation has become an essential part of the show. Alas for us, if the gospel message has become little more than an amusing and harmless part of the show, if we have become mere spectators on the journey of faith, if the practice of our faith vaccinates us against a true change of heart, if we spend our life talking about the river, fearful of ever taking the plunge, if, like the Laodiceans, we have become lukewarm, if we are reluctant to set the world ablaze with our faith, strive to enter by the narrow door.